connected to firm B and to firm C at time 1, there are many chances that B and C will be connected to each other at time 2. Again, there are advantages for this closing of the circle, basically. One is social monitoring. Each one can look at the other because they all know each other, so it's a way to avoid cheating each other. But also there are advantages that are very similar to those of the reciprocity effect. So stable relationship, trust, high quality type of interaction that can be formed by these actors. And as I said before, there are in the cluster narratives there are really several places where you can find qualitative insights about the fact that this mechanism exists. For instance, Scott in a 1988 book defines industrial localities as agglomeration of producers that coalesce out of dense networks of transactional interrelations that form as the social division of labor intents, and as a particular groups of producers are brought into intense and many-sided interaction with one another. But basically, there's this idea that within clusters, firms get together, establish linkages, and probably, even this has not been explored quantitatively. It gives an idea of the fact that over time these relationships become more embedded, denser, and the denser they are, the better they are for making stable relationships, making valuable knowledge circulate for the learning environment that they can generate, and also for the innovative environment. However, cohesion effects need not to be the unique force driving knowledge network dynamics in clusters. As said before, there are at least two other, well, in this paper I've stated that there are at least two other sets of factors. Probably in your work you find another set, I don't know, it would be good to know. So one other group that is bringing networks to become much more hierarchical is the status effect. And the status effect basically is related to the idea that if at one point in time there is one actor, then also a few actors with many ties, these actors will reinforce that position over time. So there is this idea that, for the reasons I will explain in a second, there is a process of self-reinforcement of the already strong actors. So it's completely different from the reciprocity and trans-explosion, from the cohesion effects, because there is not the search of cohesion, but it's the search of one actor growing more rapidly than the others, in terms of ties, at least. So there are two mechanisms that are typically associated with the status effect. One is became to be known in the literature as the preferential attachment mechanism. That is basically, or driver, that is basically based on the idea that if an actor has many ties at time 1, it will increase the number of ties over time. So it will become a sort of what's called in the literature a hub. And there are many real empirical studies on real networks that basically show that some of the networks are really characterized by a hub, a firm that has many ties, and the rest of the firms that are totally weakly connected or they have very full ties. Why should that happen in theoretical terms? Well, one of the motivations for this to happen is that many ties sometimes signal a high reputation. There are studies that show that reputation is really socially constructed. This is not necessary to do with the intrinsic quality of the work or the characteristics of that particular actor. I don't know if you can think about someone you think reputable, but whose work you don't value at all. So there are actors that are highly reputable because they have many connections, a lot of people talk about them, and there is a halo that gets formed around them because of the many connections that they have accumulated. And so when an actor thinks about a new firm in a cluster, or a firm with no connections, they have no time to scan through the whole characteristics or skills of the other firms. and they want advice, they need advice from other firms, an easy way is to get to the most reputable, the most famous actor in the cluster. And this reinforces the position of one actor that has already many ties, because the others, those who haven't got a clue whom to ask the most reputable. The second set of effect, the second effect in the status effect is called assortativity. And it's basically the idea that reputable actors will tend to connect to each other at some point because they want to strengthen their reputation, because they are making lobby among each other in terms of the image, of fostering the image of the cluster. So there is this mechanism called assortativity that is relatively less known than the preferential attachment one that became very fashionable some years ago, but that still tells you how much reputable firms tend to connect with each other. Third and the last group of effects, which are called capability effects, that I think are very important. Most of the studies looking at the evolution of networks, especially in clusters, but not only, but in innovation studies, tend to use secondary data, particularly alliance data and patent data. For patent data, there's certainly someone here working with the patents. So I don't want to ask you because I get dozen, but I'm sure, because it's a very good data to use for this, and also for network analysis. So, of course, this type of data bypass one problem, which is the fact that it assumes, also by the nature itself of the data, that the firms or the unit of analysis has some capabilities. An inventor needs to be skilled to do an invention. And even the alliance data typically focus on firms that are particularly well positioned on the market. So it takes for granted the capabilities of firms up to a certain level, and then of course there is heterogeneity in what they can do, and so on. Coming from the perspective of a developing country or an emerging economy, I don't take this for granted. And in fact, some of you do research on developing countries, how many of you do research on developing countries? Okay, so that's good. 10%. Good. So you know that there will be a vast heterogeneity in the skills and the capabilities of firms. Even in the same cluster in the economy, you will find the leading firm on the verge of the competition, and not only at the country level, but also internationally, really technological leader, top of everything, and there will be, the Tata of the situation, and there will be firms with no skills whatsoever, in the same sector, in the same place, no technicians working there, nor R&D, of course, just minor learning things like adaptive, really slow. So, within the same context, you have to face the presence of this strong heterogeneity, especially with the open economy, in which some firms have managed to get into international competition and to upgrade, and others, for many reasons, haven't been able. So, at any point of time, you have this high variation. So, the idea of the capabilities effect is that this strong heterogeneity in the skills of the firms conditions as well the way in which new ties are formed, and therefore the way in which networks evolve. And I test here two different hypotheses. One that is very standard, which is basically that firms with the same level of advancement in terms of skills and capabilities will have more chances to interact with each other, because they know, I'm not talking about what they know in terms of quality, I'm talking of level of advancement. So those that do a lot of experimentation will tend to talk a little bit more with those that have a lot of experimentation, because they have something to share, than with those that have no experimentation or very little. So there will be a general tendency, this is in sociological terms is the homophily. It's referred as homophily. So the similarity in some kind of characteristics will bring these actors together, and this is a very standard hypothesis. I'm not saying anything new here. What I'm saying new, I think, is this threshold effect that this hypothesis seeks, in which basically I say, okay, above a certain minimum theoretical level of these skills or capabilities, firms will engage in some form of interaction. So it's be it for reciprocity, be it for transcript triplets, be it for homomorphy, or a combination of them, they will engage in interactions. But below a certain theoretical level, or below a certain level of capabilities, that is for firms that really don't have anything inside in terms of skills, technical people, learning processes, my argument here is that these firms will be unlikely to engage into new networking processes over time. They will stay there isolated because, well, you can see it from the Cohen-Levingston absorptive capacity perspective. On the one hand, nobody will ask them because they don't know much, so there's no incentive for the others to ask them. And in many cases, they won't have also the skills to search for relevant knowledge, because when you have those working on developing countries certainly can figure it out. When you have solo capabilities, you are not even able to formulate the right questions because you don't know. You don't know what, you have a problem, but you don't really know who to ask, what type of question to ask, and you don't ask the actors that are much better than you because you won't be able to incorporate the answer, if there is an answer. So the hypothesis, and this is just an hypothesis, is that these actors will stay marginal over time. Okay, so how do I test this hypothesis? First of all, I'm done? Done. As I'm working on these clusters called Chava. It's like this area. It's around 300 kilometers south of Santiago. It's the capital city of Chile. It's here. It's in Latin America, you know. And so it's a wine cluster. It's dedicated to wine production. It's it's a long story, but to make it brief, it's the main activity now is wine production. And it's actually one of the most successful dynamic clusters in Chile. I don't know if there are Chileans here, but no. So you have to believe me. There are 2 rounds of interviews I've done in 2002 and 2006. As I said before, I've done it myself. And I've used the same research methodology. I've even gone in the same period of the year just to call the typical critical questions of reviewers. So there's not a bias related to, I don't know, summer, winter, different attitudes, and so on. And that was the period of expansion of the cluster. I've used the structured questionnaire. I have interviewed the population of the wine producers, which happens to be quite small, luckily. And because I use social network analysis as a tool for the analysis of the network dynamics, it's very hard to do sampling, or you can do sampling, but it requires extra care. So if you have the population, that's better. So I interviewed the whole firms in the cluster, which are 32 in both years, although there has been some empty active, but the total number hasn't varied. And I use the structured questionnaire. In the structured questionnaire, there are many questions, but 2 that are relevant here are 1 have to do with questions that have been used to measure a knowledge-based indicator, the number basically, which includes, it's derived from a mutual component analysis, which includes the quality of human resources, plus an indicator of the experimentation intensity that firms undertake on wine and grape growing and so on. And the second set of information that is relevant here is the knowledge network. I've used what we call a roster study. So basically, I've gone to each firm in the cluster and I asked them to indicate with which of the other firms in the cluster they have relationships. to value the relationship on a Likert scale from 1 to 3. And so these are two different questions: to whom you transfer advice and from whom you receive technical advice. So basically, for instance, if you interview this firm, you will fill on the other cells, and the firm will tell you about the relationship it has with all the other actors of the cluster. And with all the answers from all the firms, you basically construct a matrix, and by an 32 by 32 matrix in which each cell represents the relationship. So it's or it values the type of relationship that exists between the two. And so this is the raw material for doing social network analysis.